Spring 1945 arrived in the Texas flatlands with a peculiar silence. The war in Europe had ended, but its echoes traveled across the Atlantic in unexpected forms.
Your
Camp
cooperation is
Henderson,
expected.
a sprawling compound of wooden barracks and wire fences, now housed an unusual group of prisoners. 23 German women captured in France during the final Allied push. The transport truck rumbled through the main gate just after dawn. Inside, the women sat rigid, their faces carved from exhaustion and fear. They had crossed an ocean in the belly of a Liberty ship, then spent 3 days on trains moving through a country they'd been taught to hate. Now they found themselves in a landscape so vast and empty it seemed to swallow the horizon whole. Lieutenant Daniel Moore stood at attention as the prisoners descended. At 32, he commanded the camp with quiet efficiency, a trait inherited from his father, a career army man. But it was his mother's legacy that made him different. Elizabeth Moore, born Elizabeth Hoffman in Dresden, had brought her language and her recipes to a small Iowa farm in 1920. Daniel had grown up speaking German at the kitchen table, eating Kartoffelsuppe on winter evenings, understanding that humanity existed beyond the borders of any single nation. The women formed an uncertain line. Most were in their 20s and 30s, though a few showed gray in their hair. They wore mismatched civilian clothes, donated by relief organizations, and carried only small bundles of personal items. Their eyes held that particular emptiness that comes from witnessing too much. Anna Weiss stood near the front. At 38, she had worked as a chef in a Berlin hotel before the war consumed everything. Her hands, scarred from years of kitchen work, trembled slightly as she clutched a worn canvas bag. Inside, wrapped in a handkerchief, she had hidden a piece of hardtack from the ship insurance against the starvation she assumed would come. "Welcome to Camp Henderson," Daniel said in English, then repeated it in German. The effect was immediate. Several women's heads snapped up, surprise flickering across their features. A young woman named Greta Fisher, barely 23, whispered to her neighbor loud enough to be heard, "They're going to torture us in our own language." Daniel caught the comment but didn't react. He'd heard worse. Many of his fellow officers questioned his methods, his softness toward the enemy. They didn't understand that his mother had taught him something simple. Hate was exhausting, and ultimately hollow. "You will be housed in Barracks C through E," he continued. "You will be given adequate food and medical care. You will follow camp regulations without exception. Any attempt to escape will be dealt with severely. Do you understand?" Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the group. Staff Sergeant Robert Hayes, Daniel's second in command, stepped forward. At 40, Hayes was old Army, a veteran of the First World War who'd seen the trenches and never quite left them behind. He trusted Daniel's judgment, even when he didn't fully understand it. "Let's get them settled," Hayes said quietly. "I've got Corporal Jenkins ready to do a full inspection of their belongings." The processing took 3 hours. Each woman was photographed, fingerprinted, and assigned a bunk. Their possessions were examined item by item. When Anna's turn came, she placed her bag on the table with steady hands. Jenkins, a lanky kid from Alabama who'd never been more than 50 miles from home before joining up, began removing items. A comb, a small New Testament, a photograph of 2 children. He found the hardtack wrapped in the handkerchief. "Ma'am, you can't keep food in your quarters," he said, not unkindly. "Attracts rodents." Anna's English was limited, but she understood enough. She nodded, her face carefully blank. Daniel had been observing from near the doorway. He stepped forward. "Let me see that." Jenkins handed him the hardtack. Daniel turned it over in his hands. It was standard military issue, probably from a Red Cross package on the ship. He looked at Anna, who met his gaze with the defiance of someone who expected nothing and feared everything. In German, he said, "You thought we wouldn't feed you." It wasn't a question. Anna's defiance cracked just slightly. "I have children," she replied in her native tongue. "In Leipzig. Their father is dead. I need to survive, to return to them." The barracks fell quiet. Even those who didn't speak German understood the tone, the raw desperation of a mother. Daniel rewrapped the hardtack and handed it back to her. "Keep it if it makes you feel safer. But you won't need it. We have food here. You'll see." He turned to Jenkins. Mark her cleared. Next, that evening, as the women settled into their new quarters, Anna lay on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Around her, quiet conversations in German created a familiar cocoon. Someone was crying softly. Someone else was praying. Greta Fisher, in the bunk beside Anna's, whispered, "Do you think they're fattening us up for something worse?" Anna didn't answer. She was thinking about the American lieutenant who spoke her language and understood, somehow, what that piece of hardtack meant. She was thinking about how strange it felt to be treated like a person instead of a thing. And she was thinking about her children, Klaus and Margaret, and whether she would ever see them again. Outside, Daniel walked the perimeter of the camp. The spring air carried the scent of wildflowers and dust. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. He thought about his mother's kitchen, about the way she used to hum while peeling potatoes, about how she'd taught him that food was more than sustenance. It was memory, culture, love. An idea was forming in his mind, one that would seem foolish to many. But Daniel had learned something in this war. Cruelty was easy. It took no imagination, no courage. Kindness, on the other hand, required both. The morning routine began at 6. Roll call, breakfast in the mess hall, work assignments. The German women moved through it mechanically, still uncertain of their place in this new reality. Breakfast was oatmeal, toast, and coffee, more food than most had seen in months. They ate in silence, heads down, aware of the American soldiers watching from their own tables across the hall. The two groups occupied the same space but existed in separate universes, divided by language, by war, by the weight of everything that had happened. Anna observed everything. She noticed the kitchen beyond the serving line, the large industrial stoves, the hanging pots and pans. She noticed the way the American cooks worked efficiently, but without artistry, producing bulk quantities with military precision. It was food as fuel, nothing more. On the third day, during the afternoon inspection of quarters, Daniel found Anna sitting on her bunk, writing on a scrap of paper. She quickly tried to hide it, but he'd already seen. "What are you writing?" he asked in German. Anna hesitated, then showed him. It was a recipe, Kartoffelsuppe, potato soup. The ingredients were listed in precise measurements, followed by detailed instructions. At the bottom, in small letters, she'd written, "Muti's version, 1928. Daniel felt something twist in his chest. "Your mother taught you to cook." "She taught me everything," Anna replied. "Before the war, I worked at Hotel Adlon in Berlin. Head chef de partie. I made food for ambassadors, for artists, for people who traveled from all over the world." She paused. "Now I eat from a tin tray and remember what it felt like to create something beautiful." Daniel sat down on the opposite bunk, a breach of protocol that would have scandalized most officers. "My mother made this soup. Every Sunday in winter, she'd get the potatoes from our root cellar, cut them just so, add caraway seeds that my father thought tasted like soap but ate anyway because he loved her." Anna's eyes widened slightly. "Your mother is German?" "Was. She passed away 2 years ago." He looked at the recipe again. "She came to America in 1920, brought her recipes, her language, her memories. She taught me that food is how we hold on to home when everything else is gone." They sat in silence for a moment, two people on opposite sides of a war, connected by something as simple and profound as soup. "Lieutenant Moore," Anna's voice was careful, "why are you kind to us? Your soldiers, they look at us like we are monsters. Maybe we are. We come from the country that started this war, that did terrible things. Why do you treat us with respect?" Daniel stood, handing back the recipe. "Because treating you with cruelty won't undo what happened. It will only add more cruelty to a world that already has too much." He moved toward the door, then paused. "And because my mother taught me that Germans aren't monsters. They're people. Just people." That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He sat in his office, a cramped space in the administration building, and thought about his mother's kitchen, about the prisoners in Barrack C, through E, about the waste of human potential that war represented. By dawn, he'd made a decision. You want to do what? Major William Garrett stared at Daniel across his desk, as if his lieutenant had just proposed teaching the prisoners to fly. I want to allow the women to prepare their own meals. Daniel repeated calmly. We'd supervise, of course. They'd use the auxiliary kitchen in Building 7. We'd provide ingredients, and they'd cook. Garrett, a career officer from Virginia who'd fought in North Africa, leaned back in his chair. Lieutenant, these are enemy prisoners, not guests at a hotel. I'm aware, sir. But several of them have professional kitchen experience. One was a chef in Berlin. They're malnourished, demoralized, and we're feeding them institutional food that barely meets their caloric needs. If we let them cook traditional German food, it would improve morale, health, and cooperation. Or it gives them access to potential weapons, creates opportunities for unrest, and makes us look soft on Nazis. Daniel had expected this. Sir, with respect, they're not Nazis. Most were civilians caught in the wrong place. They're nurses, teachers, cooks. They were captured during the retreat from France. None of them have been identified as party members. They're still German, so is my mother. The room fell silent. Garrett knew about Daniel's background, had even approved his assignment to Camp Henderson because of his language skills. But this was different. Daniel. Garrett's voice softened slightly. I understand your sympathy, but this war just ended. American boys are still coming home in boxes. You think Washington is going to be happy when word gets out that we're letting German prisoners cook their own schnitzel? I think Washington will appreciate reduced food costs, better prisoner health, and a model of how to handle POW repatriation humanely, Daniel countered. Sir, the war in Europe is over. These women will be repatriated eventually. When they return to Germany, what story do we want them to tell? That Americans are vindictive conquerors? Or that we're better than that? Garrett studied him for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. You've got 2 weeks. Trial basis only. If there's any trouble, any at all, it stops immediately. And Daniel, you're personally responsible for every single one of them. Understood? Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. The next morning, Daniel assembled the women in the yard. The Texas sun was already climbing toward what promised to be a scorching day. They stood in uneven rows, faces shaded by the brims of donated hats, waiting for whatever new regulation or restriction was about to be announced. I have a proposal, Daniel said in German, then repeated it in English for the benefit of Sergeant Hayes and the other guards. Several of you have experience cooking. We're prepared to allow you to prepare your own meals, using the auxiliary kitchen. You'll have access to basic ingredients, potatoes, vegetables, flour, some meat. You'll cook for yourselves and share equally. In return, you maintain order, cleanliness, and follow all security protocols. This is a privilege that can be revoked at any time. The women stared at him in stunned silence. Greta Fisher broke it first. This is a trick. You're testing us. It's not a trick, Daniel replied. It's an opportunity. Take it or leave it. Anna stepped forward, her voice shaking slightly. You would trust us with knives? With fire? With the ability to prepare our own food? I would trust you to remember what it feels like to be human, Daniel said simply. Several women began to cry. One, a former nurse named Helga Braun, sank to her knees in the dust. Sergeant Hayes shifted uncomfortably, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. But Daniel gave him a subtle head shake. Building 7. Tomorrow morning at 8. Daniel continued. Anna, you'll supervise. 3 women at a time, rotating shifts. Everyone gets to cook at least once a week. Any questions? There were none. The women were beyond words. They entered Building 7 like pilgrims entering a cathedral. The auxiliary kitchen had been built to handle overflow from the main mess but had rarely been used. Now, scrubbed clean and stocked with provisions, it represented something none of them had dared hope for: autonomy. Anna led the first shift herself. Greta, and a quiet woman named Marguerite Schultz who'd worked in a bakery in Hamburg. They stood in the center of the room, surrounded by gleaming steel surfaces, and simply stared. "I don't know where to start," Greta whispered. Anna did. She moved to the pantry and began pulling ingredients: potatoes, onions, carrots, a bit of bacon that the quartermaster had allocated. Her hands moved with remembered precision, the muscle memory of thousands of meals prepared. "We'll make Kartoffelsuppe," she announced. "Simple, filling, good." Sergeant Hayes watched from the doorway, his rifle across his chest but his posture relaxed. He'd fought Germans in France, had seen friends die, had carried hatred in his heart like a stone. But watching these women cook, really cook, with care and attention, he found that hatred harder to maintain. Anna peeled potatoes with swift, economical movements. Greta chopped onions, tears streaming down her face for reasons that had nothing to do with the vegetable. Margaret diced the bacon and rendered it in a large pot, the smell filling the kitchen with a richness that seemed almost obscene in its normalcy. They worked in silence at first, each lost in private memories. Then Anna began to hum softly, almost unconsciously. The melody was Lily Marlene, the song that had been sung by soldiers on both sides of the war, a hymn to longing and loss and the girls left behind. Greta joined in, her voice thin but true. Margaret added a harmony. Soon the kitchen was filled with something more nourishing than food, the sound of people reclaiming a piece of themselves. Daniel arrived as the soup simmered. He'd intended to just check on security, but the smell stopped him in his tracks. It was his mother's kitchen, Sunday afternoons, snow falling outside while warmth gathered inside. It was home, distilled into steam and scent. "May I try it?" he asked Anna. She ladled out a small bowl and handed it to him with a spoon. Her hands were steady now, confident in this space in ways they never were anywhere else in the camp. Daniel tasted the soup. It was perfect, the potatoes tender but not mushy, the bacon adding depth, the caraway seeds providing that distinctive note his father had pretended to hate. For a moment, he was 8 years old again, sitting at his mother's table, safe and loved. "It's good," he managed to say. "It's very good." Anna smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from any of the prisoners. "It tastes like home." "Yes," Daniel agreed quietly. "It does." That evening, the women gathered in the mess hall for their first self-prepared meal. The soup was served alongside bread that Margaret had baked in the afternoon shift, using flour and yeast and the alchemy of heat. 23 women sat together, eating food made by their own hands, and the transformation was visible. They sat straighter. They talked more freely. Someone laughed a real laugh, startled out of her by a joke told in rapid Berlin dialect. The sound was so unexpected that it silenced the room for a moment, then triggered more laughter, a cascade of release. Watching from his usual observation point, Sergeant Hayes found himself smiling. He caught Daniel's eye and gave a small nod. Maybe the lieutenant was onto something after all. The second week brought more recipes, more memories surfacing through the act of cooking. Helga Braun made spätzle, the small egg noodles her grandmother had taught her to prepare by pressing dough through a colander. Greta attempted apfelstrudel with limited success, but boundless enthusiasm. A woman named Frieda Werner, who'd been silent since her arrival, spoke for the first time while preparing sauerbraten, describing her father's butcher shop in Stuttgart with such vivid detail that everyone could see the marble counters, smell the sawdust, hear the bell above the door. Food became a bridge between then and now, between who they'd been and who they might become. Anna established herself as the unofficial head chef, organizing shifts, managing inventory, teaching the less experienced women basic techniques. In the kitchen, hierarchies based on background or age dissolved. Here, competence was what mattered, and the willingness to share knowledge freely. One afternoon, while Anna kneaded dough for bread, Daniel brought his mother's old recipe box, a battered wooden container filled with cards in her neat German script. "I thought you might want to see these," he said. "Maybe try a few." Anna opened the box with reverent hands. Inside were decades of accumulated wisdom. Lebkuchen for Christmas, Zwiebelkuchen for harvest time, Rinderrouladen for Sunday dinners. Each card was stained and worn, evidence of use and love. Your mother was a good cook, Anna said softly, reading through the cards. She was a good woman, Daniel replied. She left Germany because she wanted a better life. She found it in Iowa, on a farm where the horizon went on forever, and the winters were brutal, and the summers were like standing in an oven. She never went back. But she never forgot either. Anna looked up at him. Do you think she would approve of what you're doing here? Daniel considered the question seriously. I think she'd say that kindness is never wasted, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They talked for another hour, Daniel sitting on a stool while Anna worked the dough, their conversation ranging from recipes to families to the peculiar loneliness of being caught between two worlds. By the time Daniel left, something had shifted. They weren't quite friends, the circumstances made true friendship impossible, but they'd become something rarer. Two people who saw each other clearly, without the distortions of war. That night, Anna couldn't sleep. She lay in her bunk and thought about her children, about whether they were safe, whether they had enough to eat, whether they remembered her. She thought about her husband, Ernst, dead somewhere in Russia. His body probably never recovered. She thought about the life she'd had in Berlin, the one she'd lost, and the strange new existence she was building in this Texas camp. Around her, the other women slept, their breathing creating a soft rhythm. Through the window, stars blazed in the enormous sky, more stars than she'd ever seen in Germany, where the cities had always produced too much light. Here, the darkness was complete, and the stars were infinite. She thought about Lieutenant Moore and his mother's recipe box. She thought about the American soldiers who watched them cook with expressions ranging from confusion to curiosity to something like respect. She thought about how strange it was that cruelty she'd expected hadn't materialized, and how difficult it was to adjust to an absence of harm. In the morning, she'd cook again. She'd make her mother's Kartoffelsuppe, and she'd teach Greta how to judge when the onions were perfectly caramelized, and she'd lose herself in the work that had once been her profession and was now her salvation. But tonight, she simply lay in the darkness and felt something she hadn't felt in years. The possibility of hope. Not everyone supported Daniel's experiment. Corporal Jack Morrison, a 24-year-old from Boston who'd lost his brother at Normandy, made his feelings clear during a staff meeting in the third week. With respect, sir, this is wrong, Morrison said, his voice tight with controlled anger. We're coddling the enemy. My brother died fighting these people, and now we're letting them cook like they're on some kind of vacation? Daniel had known this confrontation was coming. Your brother died fighting the Nazi regime, Corporal, not these women. Most of them never held a weapon. They were civilians caught in the war machine. They're still German, Morrison shot back, echoing Major Garrett's earlier words. They supported Hitler. They cheered when Poland fell, when France fell. They're complicit in everything that happened. Some might be, Daniel acknowledged. But can you tell me which ones? Can you look at Anna Weiss, who lost her husband and hasn't seen her children in 3 years, and tell me she's personally responsible for the Holocaust? Can you look at Greta Fischer, who's 23 and spent the war years working in a hospital, and say she deserves our cruelty? Morrison's jaw worked. It's not about individuals. It's about what they represent. Then we've already lost, Daniel said quietly. If we can't see individuals, if we can only see symbols and nations and collective guilt, then we're no better than the people we just defeated. The room fell silent. Sergeant Hayes cleared his throat. Lieutenant's got a point, Morrison. These women aren't causing trouble. They're not trying to escape. They're just trying to get through each day. Letting them cook isn't hurting anyone. But Morrison wasn't alone in his discontent. Over the next few days, Daniel overheard muttered conversations, felt the temperature of the camp shifting. Some soldiers resented the special treatment. Others questioned whether feeding the prisoners well was appropriate when rationing was still in effect back home. A few simply couldn't reconcile their hatred of Germany with the humanity of the women in barracks C through E. The crisis came during the 4th week. Someone never identified vandalized the auxiliary kitchen overnight, dumping flour on the floor, smashing eggs, leaving a crude message painted on the wall. "Feed them shit." Daniel arrived at dawn to find Anna standing in the doorway, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she said in English, her accent thick with emotion. "I know it was too good. I know we don't deserve." "Stop." Daniel's voice was sharp. "You have nothing to apologize for. This wasn't you. This was someone who's afraid." "Afraid of what?" "We are the prisoners. They have all the power." Daniel looked at the destroyed kitchen, at the waste and anger it represented. Afraid of complexity. It's easier to hate an enemy than to recognize their humanity. Easier to maintain rage than to let it go. Whoever did this isn't angry at you specifically. They're angry that you're making them feel something they don't want to feel. He spent the morning cleaning up the mess personally, refusing to delegate the task. Sergeant Hayes joined him without being asked, then Corporal Jenkins, then a handful of other soldiers who'd been quietly supportive of the cooking program. By noon, the kitchen was spotless again. That evening, Daniel called a camp-wide meeting, both prisoners and guards. He stood before them in the yard, the setting sun turning everything orange and gold, and spoke in both English and German. "We're not here to punish," he said. "We're not here to seek revenge. We're here to hold prisoners of war according to the Geneva Conventions and basic human decency. If that makes some of you uncomfortable, I understand. This war was brutal. People we loved died. But adding more brutality, more suffering, won't bring them back. It won't heal anything. It will only create more darkness." He paused, looking at the faces before him, German women with haunted eyes, American soldiers with hard-set jaws, all of them trapped in the aftermath of something too big to fully comprehend. "The kitchen stays open," he continued. "The cooking continues. And anyone who has a problem with that can request a transfer. I won't think less of you. But I won't change course." Morrison stepped forward. For a moment, Daniel thought the corporal might challenge him directly. Instead, Morrison said, "Permission to speak, sir?" "Granted. I still think this is wrong. I still think we're being too soft. But," Morrison's voice cracked slightly, "my brother would have said you were right. He was like that, always seeing the best in people, always believing in second chances. So I'm not requesting a transfer, but I'm not happy about it." "Fair enough," Daniel replied. "Thank you for your honesty, Corporal." The meeting ended quietly. As the groups dispersed, Daniel felt Sergeant Hayes beside him. "That was a hell of a speech, Lieutenant. Was it enough? Maybe. Maybe not. But it was right. That's what counts." The vandalism incident, paradoxically, strengthened the program. The prisoners, touched by Daniel's defense, and the soldiers who'd helped clean, worked even harder to prove themselves worthy of the trust placed in them. The kitchen became more than a place to prepare food. It became a symbol of possibility, of what could happen when people chose compassion over contempt. Anna expanded the menu, incorporating American ingredients in creative ways. She made a version of German pancakes using Texas pecans. She adapted traditional recipes to work with available provisions. She taught the other women not just how to cook, but why cooking mattered as an act of creation, of maintaining culture, of caring for one another. The garden idea emerged naturally. Margaret, the former baker, suggested they could grow fresh herbs to supplement the kitchen. Daniel approved immediately. Designating a small plot near Building 7, the women planted basil, thyme, rosemary, parsley seeds donated by a local farmer who'd heard about the program and wanted to help. Watching the German women work in the earth, tending plants under the Texas sun, created something unexpected: normalcy. Soldiers passing by began to stop and watch, not with hostility but with curiosity. Some asked questions. A few offered advice about gardening in the difficult soil. Corporal Jenkins, the young Alabaman, proved particularly helpful. He'd grown up on a farm and knew about growing seasons and soil composition. He found himself, almost against his will, giving tips to Helga Braun about proper spacing for tomato plants. She thanked him in halting English. He nodded awkwardly and walked away. but returned the next day with a bag of better soil from his own garden outside the camp. "Don't make a big thing about it," he told her. "Just, plants need good soil." Greta Fisher, watching this exchange, felt something shift inside her chest. She'd been so certain that Americans would hate them forever, that they were monsters in the eyes of everyone here. But this young soldier, barely older than she was, had brought them better soil. It was a small kindness, almost meaningless. It was also everything. One evening in mid-June, as the heat lay over the camp like a blanket, the women decided to do something unprecedented. They invited the American soldiers to dinner. Anna approached Daniel with the idea nervously. "We know it's unusual, but we've been cooking for 5 weeks now. We have enough ingredients. We thought, maybe it would be good to share." Daniel's first instinct was to refuse. The boundaries between prisoners and guards were already blurring in ways that made headquarters nervous. But looking at Anna's hopeful face, remembering his mother's belief that breaking bread together was the oldest form of peacemaking, he heard himself say yes. The dinner was simple but generous. Potato soup, dark bread, roasted vegetables from the garden, and a cake that Margaret had somehow managed to create despite limited sugar. The soldiers came hesitantly, unsure of the protocol. The women served them with quiet dignity. They sat at long tables in the mess hall, Americans and Germans side by side, and ate together. Conversation was stilted at first, limited by language barriers and uncertainty. Then Sergeant Hayes asked Anna about the soup recipe, and she began explaining in a mixture of German and English, using hand gestures to demonstrate technique. Greta translated for those who didn't speak German. Jenkins talked about his grandmother's cooking in Alabama. Helga described her mother's bakery. Someone produced a harmonica. Someone else knew a folk song that existed in both languages with different words. They sang together, voices tentative at first, then growing stronger. The photographer from the camp newspaper, Private Eddie Wilson, captured it in black and white. Americans and Germans, former enemies, sharing a meal and laughter. The photograph would later become famous, reprinted in newspapers across America, used in documentaries about the war's aftermath. But in the moment, it was just people trying to find their way back to humanity. After dinner, Corporal Morrison approached Anna. He stood before her stiffly, his face working with emotions he couldn't quite name. "My brother's name was Patrick," he said quietly. "He was 21 when he died at Omaha Beach. He wanted to be a teacher. He was good with kids." Morrison's voice thickened. "I've been angry for so long, angry at everyone German. But you're not. You're just people. You're just trying to survive. Same as us." Anna took his hand in both of hers. "I'm sorry for your brother. I'm sorry for all the brothers. I lost my husband in Russia. My children lost their father. Everyone lost someone. The war took and took and took until we were all empty." Morrison nodded, tears streaming down his face. Around them, the mess hall had grown quiet, everyone watching this moment of raw human connection. "I don't know how to stop being angry," Morrison admitted. "Neither do I," Anna replied. "But maybe we start by not adding more anger. Maybe that's enough." They stood there for a long moment, two people joined by grief and the tentative possibility of healing. While the summer night pressed against the windows and the future waited, uncertain but no longer entirely dark. The Red Cross had established a letter service for POWs, though the process was slow and uncertain. Mail had to be reviewed, approved, and routed through multiple channels. Many letters never arrived, but the possibility of connection, however slim, was precious. Anna had written to her children every week since arriving at Camp Henderson, not knowing if the letters reached Leipzig, if her mother-in-law who was caring for them could read the words, if Klaus and Marguerite even remembered their mother after 3 years of separation. In the 8th week, she received a reply. Daniel brought it to her in the kitchen, where she was preparing lunch. She saw the envelope in his hand and froze, the knife she'd been using to chop carrots clattering to the cutting board. "It's from Leipzig," Daniel said gently. Do you want privacy? Anna shook her head mutely and took the letter with trembling hands. The handwriting on the envelope was her mother-in-law's, shaky but legible. Inside, 3 pages covered in the same uncertain script, and at the bottom, in a child's careful letters, Mutti. Komm nach Haus. Ich vermisse dich. Klaus. Mother, come home. I miss you. Anna made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. She pressed the letter to her chest and wept for her children who missed her, for the years stolen by war, for the impossible distance between Texas and Leipzig, for the fact that she was alive to receive this letter when so many never would. Daniel stepped out to give her space, but not before she caught his sleeve. Thank you, she managed in English. Thank you for everything, for letting us cook, for treating us like people. Because of you, I can tell my children that their mother survived, that she kept her dignity, that even in the darkest place, there was light. Write them back, Daniel said. Tell them about the kitchen. Tell them about the garden. Tell them you're coming home. That night, by the light of a single bulb in the barracks, Anna wrote, My dearest Klaus and Margaret, your letter reached me today, and I cried more tears of joy than I thought possible. To know you're safe, that you remember me, that you're waiting, it gives me strength I didn't know I had. I want to tell you about where I am, so you can picture your mother and know she is well. I am in a place called Texas, in America. It is hot and flat, and the sky is bigger than you can imagine. I am in a camp with other German women, and we are prisoners, but we are treated with kindness I did not expect to find. The American officer who commands this camp had a mother from Dresden. She taught him to speak German and to cook our food. Because of this, he understands something important. We are not enemies. We are simply people caught in a war we did not make. He has allowed us to cook for ourselves. Klaus, do you remember how Mutti used to let you help in the kitchen? How you would measure the flour and get it everywhere. And we would laugh. I cook here every day now. I make Oma's potato soup, the one your father loved. I bake bread with a woman named Margaret, who reminds me of Tante Gisela. I teach younger women how to properly season meat, how to tell when vegetables are perfectly cooked. Through cooking, I stay connected to home. Every time I peel a potato, I remember our kitchen in Berlin. Every time I smell bread baking, I remember Sunday mornings when we would all eat together at the big table. Every time I stir soup, I remember that I am still a mother, still a cook, still Anna Weiss even here, so far away. The American soldiers are not monsters. Some are angry, which is understandable. Their brothers died in this war, just as your father did. But others are kind. They bring us soil for our garden. They eat the food we prepare. They treat us with respect. One soldier, the lieutenant I mentioned, told me something I want to share with you. He said that kindness is never wasted, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. I think about this often. This war tried to teach us to hate, to see only enemies. But cooking teaches something different. It teaches that we all need to eat, that we all miss home, that we all love our families. These truths exist underneath all the politics and violence. I will come home to you. I don't know when, but I will. And when I do, I will cook for you every day. We will make all the dishes you remember, and some new ones I've learned here. We will fill our kitchen with good smells and laughter. We will be a family again. Until then, be good for Oma. Study hard. Take care of each other. And know that your mother thinks of you every moment, loves you with all her heart, and is doing everything she can to return to you. The enemy is not the American who guards me or the German who fights beside you. The enemy is the war itself, the thing that separates mothers from children, that makes us forget our shared humanity. When I cook here, I fight that enemy. When you help Oma and take care of your sister, you fight it too. We will win, my darlings, not with weapons, but with love and memory and the determination to remain human no matter what. Your Mutti, who loves you more than words can say. Anna. She folded the letter carefully, addressed the envelope, and placed it in the box for outgoing mail. Then she lay down and slept more peacefully than she had in years. August brought news of repatriation. The war was truly over now. The paperwork processed, the logistics arranged. The women of Camp Henderson would be among the first POWs returned to Germany. The announcement created mixed emotions. Relief. Certainly the prospect of going home, of seeing families, of reclaiming interrupted lives, but also anxiety about what they'd find. Germany was destroyed, occupied, divided. Berlin was rubble. Food was scarce. The future was uncertain, and there was something else, harder to name. Sadness, at leaving this strange place where they'd found unexpected kindness, where they'd been allowed to remain human. Anna spent the final week in the kitchen, cooking as much as she could, teaching every recipe she knew to the women who'd become her friends. On the last day, she made one final pot of Kartoffelsuppe, enough for everyone, German and American alike. Daniel found her there in the afternoon, the kitchen filled with steam and the smell of cooking. She was carefully writing recipes on index cards, precise measurements, detailed instructions, little notes about technique. "For you," she said, handing him the stack. "So you don't forget." Daniel looked through them. Kartoffelsuppe, Rinderrouladen, Apfelstrudel, Lebkuchen, dozens more. Each one in Anna's neat hand. Each one a piece of her mother's kitchen, her own expertise, the culture she was determined to preserve. "I won't forget," he promised. "None of us will." Anna pulled something else from her pocket, a small notebook, bound in worn leather. "This was my mother's. She gave it to me when I started working at Hotel Adlon. She said a good cook always writes things down, because recipes are how we remember love." She pressed it into his hands. "I want you to have it. Fill it with your own recipes. Teach them to your children someday. Tell them about the German women who cooked in Texas and the American officer who let them remember what it meant to be free." Daniel's throat was tight. "I'll treasure this, and I'll use it. I promise." They stood together in the kitchen that had become sacred space, neutral ground, where enemies became people, where war's divisions dissolved in the steam of soup and the smell of bread. "Thank you," Anna said finally, "for seeing us, for treating us with dignity, for understanding that even prisoners need to feel human. You gave us back a piece of ourselves. I'll never forget that." "Thank you," Daniel replied, "for reminding me why this war was worth fighting. Not to destroy an enemy, but to protect the possibility of moments like this, of shared meals and common humanity, and the belief that we can be better than our worst impulses." The next morning, the women boarded trucks for the journey to the port. They wore donated clothes, carried small bags of belongings, and left behind only the memory of their presence and the kitchen garden, still growing in the Texas soil. As Anna climbed into the truck, she turned back one last time. Daniel stood at attention. As protocol required, she gave him a small wave, and he returned it, a simple gesture that contained everything they couldn't say. The trucks pulled away, dust rising in their wake. Sergeant Hayes stood beside Daniel, watching them go. "Think we did the right thing, Lieutenant?" "I think we did the human thing," Daniel replied. "Whether it was right, history will decide. But I know my mother would have approved." 5 years later, in a small town in Iowa, a new restaurant opened. It was modest, just 12 tables, a kitchen visible from the dining room, and a menu that featured German and American dishes side by side. Daniel Moore, no longer in uniform, stood behind the counter on opening day. The war was behind him now, though it lived in his memory like an old photograph still present, but fading at the edges. He'd returned to his family's farm, then decided to honor his mother's memory and his own experience by creating something new. The restaurant's name was painted above the door. Freiheit Kitchen. Freedom Kitchen. On the menu, the featured soup was listed simply as Anna's Kartoffelsuppe. Beside it, in smaller text, "Made from a recipe, shared in Camp Henderson, Texas, 1900 and 45. A reporter from the Des Moines Register came for the opening. Young, earnest, looking for a good human interest story. She asked Daniel the obvious question. Why name it Freedom Kitchen? Why serve German food when the war's still so fresh in everyone's mind? Daniel ladled soup into a bowl, the same soup he'd first tasted in a Texas prison camp. The soup his mother had made every Sunday. The soup that connected him to a woman named Anna Weiss, who'd taught him that recipes were vehicles for memory and love. Because this soup was made by people who'd lost everything, he said. Their country was destroyed. Their families were scattered. They were prisoners in a foreign land. But when we let them cook, when we gave them back that small piece of dignity, something changed. They weren't just prisoners anymore. We weren't just guards. We were people, sharing food, remembering that humanity exists underneath all the divisions we create. He handed the reporter the bowl. Try it. It's simple, just potatoes and bacon and some herbs, but it represents something bigger. It represents the choice to see individuals instead of enemies, to offer kindness when cruelty would be easier, to believe that sharing a meal can be an act of resistance against everything that tries to make us less than human. The reporter tasted the soup. It was good, rich, and comforting. The kind of food that makes you think of home even if you've never been to the place it came from. I heard a story, she said slowly, about a POW camp in Texas where German women were allowed to cook. Was that you? That was me, Daniel confirmed. Some people said it was too soft, that we should have made them suffer. Some people said that. Daniel agreed. And I understand why. The war was terrible. The things that happened, the Holocaust, the millions dead, they're almost beyond comprehension. But adding more suffering wouldn't have balanced any scales. It would just have created more darkness. These women weren't the architects of horror. They were people caught in a machine too big to escape. He wiped down the counter, his movements economical and practiced. When Anna handed me her mother's recipe notebook, she said something I'll never forget. She said recipes are how we remember love. I think about that all the time. Every dish has a story. Every meal is an act of connection. When we cook for someone, we're saying, you matter. Your hunger matters. Your humanity matters. The article ran the following Sunday, accompanied by the famous photograph from Camp Henderson, Americans and Germans sharing a meal. The boundaries of war temporarily dissolved. The response was overwhelming. Some readers praised Daniel's compassion. Others condemned him as naive, accused him of dishonoring those who died fighting Germany. But the restaurant thrived. People came for the food and stayed for the story. Veterans who'd fought in Europe sat beside German immigrants and discovered they could talk about the war without hatred. Children who'd grown up hearing only propaganda about the enemy learned that Germans were just people who made good soup. Daniel framed Anna's recipe notebook and hung it behind the counter. Customers asked about it constantly. He told them the story every time about the kitchen in Texas, about the woman who'd taught him that cooking was an act of defiance against dehumanization, about his mother who'd brought her recipes from Dresden to Iowa, and proved that culture survives even when nations fall. He never knew if Anna made it back to Leipzig, if she found her children, if they rebuilt some version of the life the war had destroyed. The chaos of post-war Germany swallowed so many stories. But he hoped, and every time he made her soup, he sent that hope out into the world like a prayer. Years passed. The restaurant became an institution, then a landmark. Daniel grew old, his hair silver, his hands steady from decades of chopping and stirring. He taught his own children to cook, passing down both his mother's recipes and Anna's, until the two traditions were inseparably intertwined. On his 70th birthday, a letter arrived from Germany. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Inside, "Dear Mr. Moore, my name is Klaus Weiss. You knew my mother, Anna, during the war. She passed away last year at the age of 86, but before she died, she told me to write to you. She wanted you to know that she made it home. She found us, my sister and me, and we rebuilt a life together. It wasn't easy. Germany was destroyed. We were poor for many years. But we survived, and eventually, we thrived. My mother opened a small restaurant in Leipzig in 1952. She served traditional German food, but she also kept a section of the menu she called the American corner dishes she'd learned to make in your camp. She said you'd taught her that food could be a bridge between enemies. She never forgot what you did. She told us the story many times about the American officer who spoke German, who let prisoners cook, who treated them with dignity when he could have treated them with cruelty. She said you restored her faith in humanity at a time when everything seemed dark. I'm writing to thank you on her behalf, and on behalf of my children and grandchildren who exist because you helped my mother survive. Your kindness rippled forward through time, creating life and love and possibility. My mother's final gift was her recipe notebook, the one she gave you a duplicate of. We still have the original. My daughter is a chef now, working in Berlin. She uses those recipes every day. Thank you for seeing my mother as a person. Thank you for letting her cook. Thank you for understanding that even in war, humanity matters. With deepest gratitude, Klaus Weiss. Daniel read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down his face. Then he went into his kitchen and made Anna's soup one more time. He served it to every customer that day for free, telling them the story of a German woman who'd taught him that recipes were vehicles for love, and that kindness was never wasted. The soup tasted like it always did. Simple, nourishing, perfect. But that day, it tasted like something more. Like redemption, like hope. Like the proof that in a world that tried so hard to divide us into enemies, there were still moments when we could choose to see each other clearly, when we could choose to feed each other, when we could choose to remember that beneath all the flags and uniforms and political slogans, we were just people, hungry and human, trying to find our way home.